Hi gang, on The Joy of Football today we're going around the Euros looking at how the players from the big three in England in the Premier League have done. Are they doing as well as they do with their clubs, or is it a different environment completely? Summertime and the Livin ain't easy. We've got that false transfer deadline, June the 30th, to talk about did the clubs get their PSR sorted out? And did they do it legitimately? Three of the best, of course, letter from the Gantry. Martin talks about Southgate. Gareth Southgate, 100, not out. And finally, stoppage time. Crystal Palace get a little bit of love. Why? Stick around to the end and find out. Don't forget to have a look at the Patreon. Don't forget to check out the written format of The Joy of Football on Substack. Don't forget to love this wonderful addiction. The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks Rashani! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football.
Hello. The Joy of Football is back in the kitchen this week after our outing for the live recording at John Lewis in Oxford Street, London last week. Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett, who was just a layabout at Chelsea Football Club.
Without whom this is not possible, if only for the use of the kitchen. But it was lovely to go to John Lewis, and I have to say they looked after us brilliantly. And I hope you enjoyed our outpourings in a different place. And if you've got any ideas and some of them aren't be printable, I'm sure, but any ideas where we might do any future outside broadcasts, we'd love to hear from you about it.
And before we just leave that, thank you for the comment from Jack, who said, I went to this on Thursday, which is when we recorded it, when my dad hadn't listened to the podcast before. Safe to say he's a big fan now. The insight offered by Martin and Neil is second to none. I'd also like to thank the John Lewis staff. They were excellent. Looking forward to the next episode. There you go.
Yeah, here.
Before we get going, and we're going to talk about the Euros a lot, obviously, but before we get going, Martin, something you said recently has been bugging me.
Only one thing.
Yeah, well, not bugging me. It's just I can't get it out of my mind.
Go on.
And you said if we want the players to play all these games, maybe they shouldn't train as hard because the training now is so hard. It took me all of a sudden back to 2020 and the Champions League after COVID in Portugal. One leg from the quarterfinals on into the final.
It was a miracle it got played. Great credit to UEFA.
And we all thought that the teams that had started the leagues back again after the suspension of play early and were racking up the games would be the ones that were in the zone. But what actually happened was that the semi-finalists were two German teams who had finished their league the earliest because they had fewer teams in the Bundesliga and because they actually got playing again a week earlier than everybody else. And two French teams who hadn't played at all because they'd suspended their league as soon as COVID happened. And what we learnt was maybe that being fresh is more important than being in the zone. And what you're saying, or what you said about maybe you should train a little bit less and not like it's a series of 40 sprints every game, every training session, they'd be fresher. And I just look at some of what's happening in the Euros and I think a lot of these players are knackered.
Well, the point I was trying to make, I was at this meeting where there was this potential talk of the players downing tools because in the future, and we've mentioned a lot about the FIFA World Club Cup in a year's time, that there would be too much and that players wouldn't want to play. And they gave us a lot of data about match days and travel days, and what they didn't give us was the training days. But the problem is, the game that we love so much, and I've said it right from the beginning of this podcast, it's never been more watchable football than it is now. one of the reasons is the dynamic nature of the running in it. And in that meeting, it was pointed out that there are now 4 times as many dynamic sprints in a game than only 10 years ago. And that means you can't do that unless you're training on a regular basis. The difficulty of factoring recovery days, I mean, sometimes coaches are frustrated because the fitness guys might say he needs a recovery day and plus he might need 2 recovery days. They do work that in. But the dynamism of the training, and also the point I was trying to make, Neil, was the repetition of it. It is, much as a lot of the players absolutely adore what they do, it is going to work. And if you get some time away from work, it freshens the mind. And the mind is a very important part in what we're talking about. In the very old days, it's going back a long time to the managers, the great managers like Brian Clough, he would take the following week off until the Friday. He'd leave on the Saturday night after the game, assuming they won, and they won a lot under him. And he'd say, I'll see you Friday, boys. And the players themselves might not come in till Wednesday or Thursday. I know 1 or 2 of the older players who actually went off and did some private training on their own because they didn't want to do that. But rest is really important, particularly for the older players, I think. And ticking over sometimes is more relevant for the over 30s, and we've got a few in the Euros, haven't we? The young players, honestly, they can play and train every day, and anybody who can remember, we can't remember what it was like to be 18 or 19. The energy is boundless, but I
can't remember what it was like to be 68 or 69.
Nor can I. I just think it's a more complicated issue than just how many matches we play. How, and not even just how often we train, but where you train. Is it a drudge to go to the same part of the training ground every day and do the same warm-up? I think the warm-ups, they're extensive, and of course they're important to make sure that they can do the sprints and all the other stuff. So you've got to go through that every day. And it can be mind-numbing, I think, if it's not varied. And I've always believed in the little non-league world that I've inhabited for the last 20 years, that we've even moved the training session to a different part of the training ground just to say, and the players go, well, why are we here? And well, we're here. And so they're already asking, they're already fresh in their minds, they're questioning it. It's not the same old thing. It's a fascinating subject. I don't think there's any real answer to it, but I recognise the fact that you're relating this to some players that played very well in the Euros and maybe they're fresher, and some players who've had really tough seasons, particularly some of the England lads, have not been so fresh, and maybe that's one of the reasons why the performances have not been. Maybe the main reason why the performances have been poor.
Some leagues, the tempo of those games is something that takes place all the way down to the bottom, and in some leagues it only takes place maybe down to the top third, where it tails off after that. It's just worth remembering, 2020, the semi-finals, and they were one-legged semi-finals, were Lyon versus Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain versus RB Leipzig. Quite extraordinary, really. Right, okay. Now, you brought up the English players. What we're going to do today, we've got 3 loads of segments called Around the Euros. And we're going to take the top 3 clubs in the Premier League, Manchester City, Arsenal, and Liverpool, and say, how have their players done in the Euros? Because so far, because it
is the end of a round, because we're talking after all the round of 16 games have played.
So, segment 1, Around the Euros. Manchester City. England have had problems. And a lot of the problems seem to centre around Kyle Walker, John Stones and Phil Foden.
Well, there are a lot of problems, and I think it's probably a bit unfair to look at those 3 and say, well, they're the only ones with problems. I mean, John Stones hardly played last season, so I think he's up on perhaps what could have happened because he's managed to get through the games, and England's defensive record is pretty good, and he's played a big part in that. Kyle Walker, I thought, had done all right until the round of 16 game where he really struggled. But then Gareth Southgate, and he's played so many games for Gareth, he kept him on. And the long throw, which was worked on in the training ground just a few days before, got England out of jail. So, that's a contribution. Perhaps hasn't quite been, as
suitably
super
acknowledged.
Yeah, I don't think it's been suitably acknowledged. But Phil Foden, I think right at the beginning of this series of podcasts, we talked about he just got a hat-trick at Brentford, and the game that I was privileged to commentate on, and the conundrum of Phil with Manchester City and Phil with England, and we've seen a bit more of it. Again, I remember thinking when he hit the post in the opening game, I think of the Euro 2020, we played in 2021, and his tournament didn't really develop. He's hit the post again in a scoring position. His goal ratio for Manchester City is incredible for an attacking midfield player. And somebody who's only, 24 last month. So the expectation on Phil is very high, and he'll probably be the first to say that he can do better. But it's as an individual, you're part of the collective, and if one part is not functioning so well, then every part of it struggles a bit. And having watched in the round of 16, the Netherlands finally put together a performance, having been very ordinary, having watched France not really yet put together a performance, I think England is still in that situation where the best is yet to come, and the English players from Manchester City will play a big part in that. They'll all play, that's for sure.
Well, one thing is certain is that there is no consistent performance from Manchester City, because Akanji has been outstanding for Switzerland. Rodri has been arguably the best player in the tournament. Bernardo Silva continues to be superb for Portugal. I don't think Kevin De Bruyne had a bad tournament, even though Belgium did. Nathan Ake has been pretty good at left back for the Netherlands. Ruben Diaz, but mostly Manchester City have shown up well in this tournament.
Yeah, but you're talking about countries like Switzerland have shown up well. Portugal have shown up pretty well, apart from them. Well, they were left out, weren't they? The Ruben Diaz and Bernardo Silva were left out of the game that they lost. I think Jeremy Doku hasn't done as well as certainly the sparks he lit at Manchester City turned the performances into blazes of success, and that hasn't quite happened. Mateo Kovacic was caught up in the end of a generation, probably for Croatia as well. But some of the to look at individuals within the structure of the tournament, you have to say, well, how are their countries playing? How are their teams playing? And certainly Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, and I agree with you about Rodri. He's just amazing. I called him defeat-proof. The FA Cup final showed that he isn't quite that, but he is just an extraordinary person as well as a player.
I saw his first league game for Manchester City. They won 5-0 at West Ham, and I was covering it, and I was astonished at how good he was and how disciplined he was, because of course at Atletico Madrid he was a number 8. He was a 4-4-2 up and downer.
He only played one season for Atletico Madrid,
and he knocked in a few long shot goals, and he was a kind of he was a very English style
I
player.
could have forewarned you what you were going to see, because I was privileged to meet him before that game when they were playing in the Asia Trophy, and he was put up for the press conference, and he talked. A lot of Spanish players speak good English, but he talked in a very conversational English, and we asked him where this all came from, and he said, well, I was lucky my family sent me to the USA to these camps, soccer camps, just general sociable camps, to broaden me as a person, and so in walking into a new club in England, he had all the tools on the field, but he had all the tools off the field as well, and I've never forgotten that, because it was an amazing press conference where his colloquial use of language was very impressive, and it wasn't the toughest press conference. It was a pre-season tour, but he dealt with it all extremely well, and he's dealt pretty much with everything that's come his way since, and he's dealing with this tournament.
That's a big shock to me, because after 14 years of hosting a radio show for the USA, I thought they spoke a completely different language to us, but I'll have to come to terms with that. That is round one of Around the Euros. We're now going to bring back a segment that we introduced a couple of weeks ago, which is Summertime and the Livin' Ain't Easy. It's the first year, really, when the end of the financial year, the official end of the season, June
I
the
just
30th.
stop you for a second, Neil. For our listeners and viewers, this is a serious subject about how football is going.
Yeah.
Back to you.
June the 30th was the end of the financial year. And it seemed there was a transfer deadline for people to get their PSR, which is their profitability and sustainable regulations, in place, where you can't lose more than £105 million over 3 years. As it stands now, that's going to change, but it still stands now. And what we suddenly saw with these ludicrous rules that were brought in, just ill thought out, that clubs were doing swaps with inflated fees, and that they were also selling homegrown players, academy-produced players, because that goes down as all profit, not as whatever you sell over what you paid as the profit. And some of the suspects, if you can call it that, deals were Chelsea and Aston Villa earmarked to Villa for £37.5 million. Omar Kellyman, who I'd never heard of, for £19 million
He
back
had a
to
few
Chelsea.
substitute appearances last season.
Yep. Aston Villa again with Everton, buying Lewis Dobbin for £10 million and transferring back to them another player I'd never heard of, and I'm going to get you to pronounce his name.
Tim Erobunim.
And Aston Villa again with Juventus. And this, of course, Juventus doing it with the Italian rules and also with the UEFA financial fair play. So Villa bought Sam Illing Jr., who, by the way, was a Chelsea youth player, of course, for €14 million. Enzo
Baranachea.
Thank you. For €8 million plus 3 million add-ons, whereas Juventus bought from Aston Villa Douglas Luiz for €50 million. And the other big one was Newcastle and Nottingham Forest. Elliot Anderson went from Newcastle to Forest for £35 million. And Forest sold Newcastle one of their 3 international goalkeepers, Odysseus
Vlachodimos.
Thank you. For an undisclosed fee.
Well, first of all, this is just an aside to it, really. I feel very sorry for Elliot Anderson because he has family connections with Newcastle, and he, the second generation from the family playing for Newcastle. Jeff Allen, I think, might be a grandparent, scored a goal for Newcastle. He only played 25, 30 games. Elliot Anderson at Nottingham Forest had a perfectly good Premier League goal disallowed, and the PGMOL actually apologised for the goal being disallowed. He leaves Newcastle having never scored a league goal for them, and I was hoping at the end of the season that Elliot got some game time, that at least he would get a goal. And I thought, well, next season he'll get one. He's getting more game time. But now he's gone to the very club on whose ground he got denied his goal. So, I mean, listen, what I've learned about everything in football is that whenever a rule is made, everybody will work as hard as possible to find a loophole, whether it's dealing with on-the-field laws of the game or whether it's financial matters, to avoid the lawmakers, the rule makers, the regulation makers maybe don't have the time, and maybe they don't have the right people advising them, saying, well, if you do that, this will happen and this will happen. And they don't think not just the first consequence, the second consequence, the third consequence. I'll give you an example. I won't name him because it will embarrass him, but a former referee's chief said, what I'm going to do is get the law changed through IFAB that if a penalty is scored, then the player won't get sent off because he hasn't denied a goal scoring opportunity. But if the penalty is saved, he'll get sent off. So I go, well, right, it's the first minute of the game and this penalty happens. If I was the coach, I'll tell my player to miss. So we won't get the goal, but we'll play against 10 men for 89 minutes. And he went, you wouldn't do that. I said, this is the sort of thing that will happen. And this is a consequence in a financial way of that kind of lack of working out what the knock-ons are. You know?
The PFA chief executive, Maheta Malango, who's beginning to make a bit of an impression in his role, has gone ballistic over this rule that if you sell academy players, you get to put down on paper the
dispensation, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And he said, how can it make sense that due to the rules you end up selling an academy player? It does not make sense for him. It doesn't make sense for the club either, because they are part of your identity. You end up in nonsensical situations that meet the rules but are counterproductive for the players, the club and the fans, because they want to see their academy players. Those are the ones who make you dream, that create that bond with the club. And this is why the governance of football needs to change. Now, I can tell you, Martin, that I went to 2 or 3 games last season, cup games, Carabao Cup in particular, in which Chelsea played a number of young players. And the atmosphere was awful, not because the crowd didn't want them to do well, but because nobody knew who anybody was, because they'd all been bought in the last 6 months, and nobody recognised which player was which person. It really is challenging their identity. Now, I saw a statistic this week that I wasn't even aware of, that 7 of the last 10 players that Chelsea have sold for money are academy-produced players.
But I guess that's what used to happen, because you didn't have a raft of foreign players on your roster. They were all pretty much produced or bought from within the English system. But this is obviously a different reason for it. And it is right. But another thing came to my mind when you were talking. It used to be said that if you were a homegrown player and went to the team, it was much harder for you than the big signings. The clubs, the fans, but within the British market, of course, they knew the players that were being brought in, because they were stars within British football. That it was harder for the homegrown player to actually make a real impression. He got the stick from the fans. Now, obviously, this has changed enormously. And yeah, it's a consequence of 2 things, I think. 1, the regulation, and 2, the investors, who are the men running our football clubs, don't understand deeply enough. I'm not saying they don't try to understand it, but if you're coming from a different system and a different way of running football, you won't get it straight away. They don't understand what these clubs mean. We are a small country. People know not just about their own football club, but they know all the other football clubs, because they go to away games, which doesn't happen in the countries that some of these investors are coming from. This whole togetherness is under threat, really. And I think you can't give people a lesson in identity. I mean, at your club, the suggestion was, let's have a system where the top of the last club to be relegated actually plays a playoff against the lower club from the promoted teams, the 4th place, or they're in the championship. The last time that happened, there were riots, and the system was abolished after 2 or 3 goes at it. Nobody had bothered to tell the unfortunate gentleman who suggested this that he was talking from the wrong part of his anatomy. Yeah. And that's the kind of difficulty that this is bringing in. But identity is so important. And the one that always comes up, and of course we have a Chelsea interest with Neil in the podcast, Conor Gallagher, as far as I know, wants to play for Chelsea, and would even probably negotiate a deal that was favourable to the club, more favourable to him, to stay at Chelsea. It's been his ambition. He's had to work so hard through various loans. Many people, and probably including you, thought he wasn't going to get this amount of game time at Chelsea. Now he's playing for England through Chelsea. So the whole thing is coming together for Conor. And if it has to go because the club basically say, well, we're not going to offer you a deal, the best he can do is wait till next season, go out, I believe his contract's up then, and go for nothing and have a bit of a respite. But I mean, the season that's coming up, he probably won't be involved, and he can't do that because he's an England player.
Yeah, and he's going to be replaced by a player who's not playing for England, who's older than him.
Yes. Well, it seems that way, doesn't it? But that's a different kind of connection. That's because the new manager knows the player that's coming. We're talking about Keane and Dewsbury Hall here, aren't we?
But the only other thing just to round this off is, do you think that some of these swap deals aren't to do with finances and are actually to do with the culture of the owners? Because, of course, over in the States in particular, they have trades, as they call it, where the player has no say and the owners trade players.
Well, they've walked into a system whereby the player has every say. And you can't, there is an expression, I believe it's called the pink slip, where you get the pink slip and you're gone. or you're either gone out of the club or out of the game, or you've gone to another club in the organisation, and you don't have any say about it. And that cannot happen in this. I don't want this podcast to be drilled at those who are running our football clubs, because we can't manage without them. There's not enough money in this country to go back to the corner shop mentality of Bob Lord at Burnley, the local butcher, and they won the league when he was chairman of Burnley.
1960.
Yeah. So that's never going to happen again. So the game as it is, which we love, and the structure of the Premier League, which we love, has functioned in recent years because that investment is there. It sits uneasily for me to think that they're here just to make a profit. I'd love to sit down and talk to them and say, if that's your bottom line, then you don't fit. But what happens, suppose your American owners go and just go, and nobody can come in and fill that gap. Well, Chelsea have been on the verge of bankruptcy in the time you've been involved with them. That would happen again. So they're there for positive reasons. But we have to try and make all these things add up. And I've always said, if these things don't happen, sit round the table, no vested interests, for the good of the game. It's an impossible dream.
Yeah. What we're trying to achieve here is retain the joy of football,
yes,
and not lose it. I just want to make one more point. When Burnley went top of the table in 1960 on Easter Monday, how did they do it?
Probably by beating Chelsea.
No, they did it because Chelsea won 1-0 at Tottenham and knocked them off the top
it wouldn't be a Chelsea defeat. Neil would never bring that into this podcast.
Right.
But listen, it's a serious issue, and we'll come back to it as it progresses. Yeah. But there are other sides to this story, but it doesn't sit quite right with us at the moment, that's for sure.
Okay, round 2 of Around the Euros. Arsenal. Arsenal, what have you... I think Arsenal players have struggled a bit more than Manchester City players. Saka, Trossard, Jorginho, Kiwior, Zinchenko. Reyes only had one game. Whereas, actually, I talk about Rodri, player that's I can't believe how good Saliba's been in this tournament.
Yeah, he's been terrific.
And it hurts me to say it, but Kai Havertz ain't been bad.
No, Kai Havertz has put together the sort of performance for Germany that we've sort of got used to him doing for first Chelsea and then Arsenal, which is perhaps not always looking the part, but actually delivering the goods. And Declan Rice, I have felt sorry for in the England setup, because there have been difficulties, as we alluded to earlier, in the last game. The two fullbacks had problems. They were just off their A game, really. And Mark Gahey, who was played into trouble, was booked after 3 minutes. So you're suddenly in Declan's position. You're worried about the back four, and therefore you can't maybe make such an impression in a game. But towards the end, when England were really getting desperate, then he was at the forefront of trying to rescue it. And of course, the rescue did happen.
And it hit the post.
Yeah, Zinchenko hasn't really played. He's lost his place. And Kiwior is probably... Well, he's got into the Arsenal team, but Poland didn't have a very good tournament either. And Italy were terrible, and so Jorginho suffered from that. So I think in looking at it, this is your idea, and I think it's a good idea that we've looked at it this way. It's a different way of looking at the Euros. I hope a more personal way for the listeners and the viewers. But it is about the collective, and I don't think individually you could point the finger at any of the ones we mentioned and say, well, you are responsible for your team being poor. And Italy's a mystery to me. Belgium's less of a mystery, because I think we've seen signs of this happening. And England are still in the tournament. And as I mentioned earlier, they have a performance in them. And I'm absolutely certain of that.
What have you made of William Saliba?
Well, it was very odd that he didn't come back to Arsenal earlier. I think his performances in France, I had a suspicion there might be something that was not available for us as journalists to know about. There might be a reason why he looked such a good player when he's out on loan. But he's come back and lived up to all the promise, and that's a difficult thing to do at a time when Arsenal were having a bit of a clear out. It opened the door for others to come in and have an opportunity. That's one thing, but taking the opportunity, I think he's the real deal. All the compliments you want to play on an individual player, and the way he dealt with Romelu Lukaku, I thought was particularly impressive, because Belgium were at their wits' end really, and Rom had their goals disallowed in the earlier games. So he wasn't in a position where he frustrated and wanting to do really well. And France haven't been great, but they're very hard to play against and very hard to score against. They just need to find a way to score that isn't own goals or penalties.
Yeah. Oh, Didier Deschamps, I love Didier.
You know him quite well, don't you?
But I mean, he played Mbappe at centre forward. He played 4-2-3-1 with Griezmann at 10 and Dembele on the right wing. Dembele was awful, so nice, but Griezmann on the right wing played 4-3-3, and that means Kante's playing out of position again.
Yeah, but he's playing out of his skin as well.
Well, not since he's been moved to the right of the midfield three. It's the same old thing. It's what happened before with Maurizio Sarri. He can't play there. Doing my head in. Yeah.
You're not French by any chance, are you?
No, but I eat a lot of French.
You did ask me about who I was qualified for.
No, I don't qualify for France, but
only by gastronomic delight.
Yes, yeah. Right, okay. That's round 2. We got round 3 to come. Now we're going to go on to Letter from the Gantry.
Letter from the Gantry.
And before you start, Martin, with your letter from the Gantry, let me read a message that we've received from Jesus in Houston, Texas. Martin's letters from the Gantry are brilliant. Absolutely love hearing and reading them. Officially listened to all episodes as of 10 minutes ago, and 100% agree with you, that's me, on the dislike of Chelsea fans singing "We Hate Tottenham" during the playing of the Liquidator. Have really fallen in love with the show and look forward to each new episode. So,
Jesus, you say?
Yeah.
Jesus for you. The Euro quarter-final against Switzerland, a landmark for Gareth Southgate, in charge of England for the 100th time. He got the job after a match against Slovakia. He almost lost it when another international against Slovakia was stretching the patience of a nation and himself to the limit. On the field, England were being stretched, but not in the end to breaking point. The obituaries, though, were being written in the press box when Kyle Walker, a Southgate stalwart, hurled in a long throw. Mark Gahey, a player at Gareth's first club, Crystal Palace, flicked on, and Jude Bellingham turned termination into merely a near-death experience. Bellingham could now fully celebrate his 21st birthday, which was the day before. It was already his 33rd cap. Opportunities for young players have been plentiful under Gareth Southgate. I'm pretty sure it was England's first goal from a long throw in a major tournament since the World Cup of 1982. In Bilbao, I was lucky enough to be there, when the thrower was Steve Coppell, who some 8 years later, as manager of Crystal Palace, would give the young Southgate his first-team debut. The Gahey of that day was Terry Butcher. The Bellingham was Brian Robson. It was just 27 seconds into England's opening game against France. This time it seemed a similar amount of time from what would have been the very final minute. When the whistle actually went, it was now to signal extra time. Less than 60 seconds into that extra time, England had scored again. It will be pointed out from critics of conservatism under Southgate that 3 of England's substitutes were involved. The counter to that is that indeed 3 of England's substitutes were involved, not sitting on the bench. For the record, they were Cole Palmer with a free kick, Eberechi Eze keeping the play alive, Ivan Toney, whose header across goal gave Harry Kane the perfect moment. So for Gareth's England, another quarter-final, the stage where the adventure stopped in the last World Cup, a very costly penalty miss against France, and it came just 2 years after a shootout defeat which edged England out of being the defending champions at this Euro. Prior to that, 4th in the 2018 World Cup, and the following year, 3rd in the inaugural Nations League, beating Switzerland, incidentally, to that bronze medal. It is a fine body of work in an increasingly competitive market. What also has to be recognised is the humility and integrity he's brought with him. He sets high standards of behaviour and practices what he preaches. He is a public figure and finds himself in the crossfire of any political issue which touches the game. His responses have been statesmanlike. He rarely gets a word out of place. Maybe it shouldn't be part of the job, but it is what it is. And Gareth Southgate has coped very capably with many an awkward situation outside his expected level of expertise. His very clear influence over the players has helped the England national team reconnect with the public. It's a strong bond and survived negative reaction and recriminations following the disappointing performances in the first 4 games at Euro 2024. He knows he would have been out on 99 had England been eliminated. And to continue the cricket metaphor, he's been through some very nervous 90s to reach his century. He's only the 3rd England manager to take charge of 100 games. The first was the original appointment, Walter Winterbottom, 139 internationals between 1946 and 1963, but those were very different times. Alf Ramsey succeeded Walter and became Sir Alf during his tenure after guiding England to the World Cup in 1966, still the country's only major international trophy. Ramsey had 113 games and did finish 3rd in the much trimmer Euro of 1968. His win percentage overall was 61. Southgate very much on the same page. As a player, he reached 57 caps, a fine international career. His penalty failure in the shootout in the semi-final of Euro 96 could have finished a lesser man. It was only his 9th game for England. He dealt with adversity and came back stronger. I suspect that even if England are to become European champions, he will feel it's time to hand over the reins. England always expects. Under that pressure, on the field and off it, Gareth Southgate has always stood up to be counted.
One of the things that interests me about Southgate is that he's one of those managers that you've never really seen a player come out and be negative about in public. Most managers, from Sir Alex to Pep to anyone you can think of, really, get some kind of negative media from 1 or 2 or 3 of their players. But I've never seen anyone be negative about Gareth Southgate.
No, he's helped turn. Of course, it's meant this is a compliment, I think, but other people use it as a negative. He's an FA man, so he's towed that particular party line. What he has been fortunate is St George's Park has become, in his tenure, really a vital part of the preparation for England teams. Whereas when it was first rolled out for the players who were used to staying at the Grove in Watford and luxury 5-star, 6-star hotels probably.
With golf courses.
Yeah, with golf courses. It was not seen as an upgrade. And maybe in terms of general living facilities, it wasn't. But in terms of football facilities, it was absolutely tremendous and has been so. So that's part of the reason. So and a lot of the players now of an age where they didn't know anything but St George's Park, and they're basically, they're attuned to what's required. They look forward to going to it. They look forward to meeting up with Gareth because, the players get a really proper break. I don't mean time break, within the use of the word, as in terms of a relationship with somebody. He gives them. He's always positive. Glass is always half full, and it's a pleasure. I'm not saying he's schoolmasterly or anything like that, but the rules. You get there, and the players realise if they want to be successful, and England have been successful. I said it's a really good body of work. Yes, it would be a wonderful way to end it if he took England to the silverware this time. But even so, I've been through so many generations of really good people trying to solve this conundrum and getting nowhere near what Gareth Southgate's done. And it's not the impossible job, but it's very, very difficult. And he's turned it into something where I think there'll be people queuing up to take over from him because he's left such a great structure. He might surprise me and everybody else by staying. He'll probably get the option to do that, particularly if England go on in the latter part of the tournament, go deep into the competition. But what he's done, I just did the letter to just remind people what he's done, really. And he's a proper bloke.
I'm not sure who the successor is.
No,
if it's not, name escapes me, Lee Carsley. And loads of people are going to say, who's that?
Now, Lee Carsley is, of course, English, but played for the Republic of Ireland. And your argument about you've got to be, at least in football terms, a citizen of the country.
It is him, isn't it? He was England under 21's coach.
Yeah. Really combative player and a football man through and through. And certainly he'd be on the list.
Right, there you go. Okay, letter from the Gantry. And don't forget, you can read the letters from the Gantry now on our Substack site, also called The Joy of Football. Just look up on my social media or Joy of Football.
We've written contributions from Neil as well that are well worth finding out about. Even for me, I look forward to picking them up.
Good. Right, round 3 of Around the Euros. And this is Liverpool. Now, Liverpool have had a very mixed Euros so far, but I've got to say Van Dijk has been outstanding. And you particularly enjoyed Szoboszlai, I know, in the group stage.
Yeah, I've enjoyed Gakpo more, to be honest, because he's achieved more.
I can't believe how well he's playing.
Yeah. He's, I guess we might come on to this in our last section here, but there are players who get signed from tournaments, and Cody Gakpo had a very good World Cup, and he's having a very good tournament this time. So he's obviously got the temperament to work in the competitive surroundings of what comes hard and fast at you in a tournament. And so he's almost probably marginally improved on what he did in Qatar. And he got his move to Liverpool. And so
the interesting thing for me is that for the Dutch, he's playing on the left wing. And at Liverpool, he's going to struggle to do that because of Diaz.
Yes, but he's not a left winger. He's an attacking player he's a bit of a Kai Havertz in some ways.
Yes.
You know, he's not an out and out centre
Because
forward.
he can play midfield.
He can play midfield, and he's got that wonderful Dutch technique about his work. And he had a very, very good round of 16 game where he scored and set up another of the goals for Daniel Marlon. So Szoboszlai, Hungary didn't really punch their weight, and he would be feeling that very keenly. But he's a player who's made a pretty sharp impact. I don't think he had the most consistent season at Liverpool, but he certainly started extremely well, and I'm sure there's more to come. But we look at the others. Trent Alexander-Arnold's had 2. I'm loath to say this because everybody's backing him as a midfield player, but he's a right back who can move into midfield in the way that system was organised for that, and that's what he did for Jurgen Klopp in the last couple of seasons. I believe when players are switched from a position into another position, and they're talented footballers, that they will make a good impression to start with. But it's when you played 4 or 5 games there that you've got no real experience. You haven't got the body of work as he's got as a right back. So the fact that was the position that got changed, first to Conor Gallagher, then to Kobbie Mainoo, suggests that England didn't feel it was working. But I thought he did okay in the games, you know. But it is, the distances are different. You know, you're really thinking the game instead of just playing it, which he would do at right back. And the question marks about his defending at right back still remain. Otherwise, he probably would have played at right back, and maybe Kyle Walker could have played on the left, you know. And
or in the back 3.
Yeah, or in a back 3. Well, yeah, and a wing back then. And Joe Gomez, who's in the England squad and had his best football, I thought, this season, playing left back, which is he's a right back or a centre half or a holding midfield player, and then push comes to shove, and he put in a great series of matches as a left back. And the great thing, well, not the great thing, Joe probably want me to mention it, but he's never scored a senior goal. But he's looked much more like scoring his first goal coming on his right foot from left back. But
I think the
not
thing
been
that's
used.
really worth saying here, and this is one of the things that really bugs me when people talk about football, is that we don't see training, and they train every day, and we don't see what's practiced in training, what works and what doesn't work. And to think that selections are made without experiences being undergone and conclusions being reached on evidence is just to not understand football, if you think that's what happens.
Yeah, but I agree, because most of my career I've been allowed into training.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's more difficult now, and I understand that there are far more commentators and far more days where they want to operate in total secrecy. But I love going, and I still ask, and some managers let me in and some don't. But for England, it would be very difficult, because there are defined media times, and you get sometimes like the first 15 minutes of a training session, which is good for identifying the players, but not so good for seeing the shape of the team. And the coaches don't want you to see the shape of the team, really, because they can't trust where that information is going to end up. And of course, there are journalists from the opposing team's country who will be sent in as auxiliary spies, really. But anyway, Joe hasn't had a go. Kanate hasn't had a go, has he?
And Andy Robertson for Scotland has never quite been Andy Robertson Andy Robertson of Liverpool, I would argue, is world class.
He's one of the best pound for pound signings that Liverpool have ever made.
And Andy Robertson for Scotland is, I don't know, an island.
He carries the weight of the country on his shoulders as captain, and John McGinn, I think, comes into that category as well. And it's no one's fault. It's the talent pool is a smaller country, and the way the game is, and the levels that you're aspiring to. So I always think he's trying to do more than just play left back for Scotland, and that is a tough gig to do that. One thing about Andy, he always pitches up to talk about it afterwards.
Oh, top man, top player. But it is difficult with Scotland. Right, okay. If you are a lover of Cristiano Ronaldo, switch off now. Right, Martin.
You've just lost us 95%.
Diogo Jota should be playing ahead of Cristiano Ronaldo.
Well, certainly playing with Cristiano Ronaldo.
Ahead of him.
Well,
you're not going to leave out Rafael Leao.
Well, you might. I mean,
no, you're not.
If he dives anymore, he won't be playing anyway. He's been suspended for that. Diogo Jota is not only a very fine player, but he's a very mature person, and he knows how to get himself into matches we brought on. I mean, he actually stirred when they needed shaking and stirring in Portugal. He won the penalty. I think the problem with playing with Cristiano Ronaldo is now Cristiano is very much a centre forward playing with the width of the penalty areas, not going wide, where of course he startled us with his brilliance as a youngster and has still played in both positions really until very recently. So there's a bit of a block there for other players to get into those sort of positions. But I was very surprised. I mean, Gonzalo Ramos is a very fine player as well. I know Roberto Martinez quite well, and I can understand the difficulty. I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo is still a match winner, a game changer. And yes, he's missed a penalty, and yes, he's reacted very emotionally. He cares, and you'd rather have players who care than those who don't. I think watching the game, when the substitutions were made, or should Cristiano be taken off for a Gonzalo Ramos, which would be a like-for-like sub. It wouldn't be a like-for-like sub bringing Jota on to replace him. I don't think so. I think Jota deserves a place in the team. I think he's an amazing, that knack of finding where a chance is. You know, you can't coach that really. He's just got it. And at Liverpool, where he didn't do this at Wolves, he's finding himself in a position where he can head goals now, which he's obviously improved on his time at Anfield. I think if Portugal are going to progress, he's got a bigger part to play. But the Ronaldo issue, I think one of my commentary colleagues said, I think very wisely in British television, enjoy Messi and Ronaldo when you can, the numbers don't lie. It's the achievement that produces those numbers. I can't see anybody, even with the young talent coming up, producing the longevity. And these aren't games tucked away in the second division of Portuguese football, Spanish football, or in English football, or whatever. These are every game is a narrative for the two of them. So they have to deal with enormous pressure. I worry a bit for Cristiano when it does have to finish, because he gives so much to it, and he's got to find a way. I think I mentioned on the podcast a couple of weeks ago that Alan Shearer, at a function I was attending, very straightly said, and right from his heart, there's nothing since I retired from football that's given me the thrill that scoring a goal does. And that for Cristiano Ronaldo, it's written all over his face, and you know that without even meeting. He won't have to tell you that. It's absolutely evident, and it can't go on forever. But he's still there. Portugal is still there. Hopefully, I think, just from my personal point of view, Diogo Jota will be there, and Gonzalo Ramos' time will come.
At the memorial service for Ray Wilkins after he died, Ross Wilkins, his son, spoke absolutely beautifully, emotionally, but with beautiful clarity about the depression that Ray had suffered after stopping playing. And when we were outside afterwards, Colin Pates, the ex-player, I was talking to him, and he said, I believe, and I have found, that every footballer on retiring suffers from some degree of depression. It may be different to others, but some degree of depression. And the figures show that the number of players who go bankrupt, who suffer divorce and other issues, mental health issues, on retiring is extraordinarily high.
You used a word in our very first podcast about the addiction, and that's as fans. But when you're out there and you're making the story happen, the highs, the adrenaline rushes must be amazing. And I played non-league football, and there were maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people in the ground, but it was still. I still dream. I'm 78. I still dream about playing. In fact, I've got more pace in my dreams than I ever had when I was 20 years old. But that's what it means.
And you've played since you turned 78.
Yeah. I played
in
October, scored in a charity game at Dartford. Yes, it's on video, and I'm not going to show it to you because I look so old.
You are. Right. We'll carry on. The point of doing this today was that the Manchester City, Arsenal, and Liverpool players have been amongst the best players in the tournament, but not all of them.
And the top three of English football, that's why you went there. And apologies to Villa and Spurs and the teams that came after Manchester United. We might find them for another day, but the tournament's still got a couple of weeks to go.
Right, let's move on to 3 of the best.
And he makes them pay.
3 of the best. He's made them pay. And that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Young player, old player, player. Martin Tyler, young player.
Well, I've already talked about him a bit, William Saliba.
And we forget how young he is.
Yeah, I mean, there is an elegance. It's not an arrogance, really. I don't see arrogance in him. I see elegance, control, reading the situation, doing things. They always say that defenders get better with age, but I mean, he's got the lot, although your good friend Didier Deschamps doesn't agree with me.
Well, what was that extraordinary statement that he made?
Some of his parts of his games I really don't like. I think was it Strong as That? Yeah. Well, I can't argue with that because he has far greater knowledge. But you mentioned seeing in training, which I don't think I've ever seen William train actually. So rough edges to be smoothed out maybe. Sometimes, or maybe he needs to be told that he's not quite as good as everybody else is telling him. I don't think he's a conceited young man at all, but if you've got a lot of sycophants around you, and that is part of the problem of the superstars, sorting out who's making the right comments about the game and who's just patting you on the back. But France have really struggled to score goals, so the fact that they've defended so well is a really important part of their Euro adventure, and whether they keep going, we'll see. But he's hard to get the better of, and obviously a magnificent season.
Well, they're not letting in goals, France.
No,
I mean, they've let in the fewest goals. Of course, I'm in love, as you know, with Mike Maignan and want him at Chelsea and the goalkeeper. But for Saliba, it's very different. I would think at Arsenal playing on the right of Gonzalez to at France playing on the left of Upamecano.
The right, Gabriel.
Pardon?
At Arsenal, Gabriel.
Yeah. Who did I say?
Oh, well, some hybrid name, I think. But
I can't
you didn't say Gabriel.
Oh.
But anyway,
This
is where we edit it, actually. Or if you're hearing it or not.
But Upamecano is completely different from Gabriel. I mean, Upamecano is basically a unit. And I'm not sure how good a unit, but it must be a very different experience for Saliba. Those two different teams.
It's going fine. So I'd like to, as I say, he gets 2 mentions today, but he deserves it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I'm going on a theme with my players this week, and I'm starting. My young player is a Chelsea player, Moises Caicedo. £115 million record transfer for the club. He's playing in Copa America. He's played now 62 games this season for club and country. He didn't start the season because he was at Brighton and they didn't play him because they knew the move was likely to happen. So he missed the first couple of weeks of the season and he struggled to adapt. I saw him a lot at Brighton. I saw him play many games for Brighton, and I thought he was an N'Golo Kante in the making. I saw him play against Manchester United in the season where Rashford got 30 goals, and Brighton had run out of right backs, and he played right back against Rashford and marked him out of the game. This is an extraordinary youngster. Now, I've learnt that he hasn't quite got that bursting pace of Kante, so he won't become a Kante. But what he has got is an extraordinary range of passing that puts him on a different level to Kante with the ball, and on a different level to those other great holding midfielders that I've lived with, like Makelele with the ball. And he's already approaching 50 caps for Ecuador. I'm looking at him for next season and thinking, building on that Brighton campaign, this guy could be one of the best players in the Premier League next season. Holding midfielder, or the pivot midfielder. I want to call it the pivot midfielder because they are so important. They need to be creative, like Rodri, and he is, Caicedo.
You know why I'm asking this question? Who's going to play alongside him?
Well, he plays best football next to Conor Gallagher.
Yes, that's why I've asked the question. If Conor Gallagher's playing for Aston Villa or Spurs, who's going to play alongside him?
We won't be playing for Spurs because they've gone out and bought Archie Gray. I mean, they might play Archie Gray at fullback to begin with, but I don't think so. I think they bought him as a midfielder. He'll probably be playing next to...
Come on, you've got to say it.
Kieran Dewsbury Hall.
Yes, possibly.
Somebody did say to me this week that Chelsea have bought and sold a couple of stately homes this week, Lewis Hall and Dewsbury Hall. But I don't know. The answer is I don't know. But what I do know is he'll play. Old player.
Yes, old player is Wayne Rooney. And this is because I was really struck by the perception of his newspaper column prior to England, on the morning of England playing their round of 16 game, about Jude Bellingham and how he had identified a streak in Bellingham's game that he was worried about, that he had experienced himself in the very stadium where this game was being played, and that he was sending out a warning to Jude and to English fans, really, that the competitive streak that's obviously part of the DNA that makes Jude Bellingham the wonderful, compelling player that we're all falling in love with, but that this was a risk. And I just thought, and Wayne, he was quite shy when he was playing. Really, he wasn't great for after-match interviews, but now he found
was
himself
shy off camera as well.
Yeah, he is, and it wasn't easy for him to make all these speeches, all the awards he got, the records he broke, and everything. But I have to say, as a television viewer now, I'm watching him. I may not have the opportunity to work with him as a pundit, but I think he's very, very good, and his eye for the game, eye for the detail of the game, I think in the end will make him an outstanding manager. But obviously he's not made perhaps the best choices to make that career happen straight away, and it might be a good thing for him to serve time, and I wish him very well down at Plymouth Argyle, particularly if he's going to live in Salcombe, which is one of the most lovely places in that part of the world, which I understand he is going to. But I just thought that was so spot on, and of course Jude ended up with a bit of bad publicity at the end of the game, which he denies the interpretation of it from some quarters, and he's quite entitled to do that. But I hope that those words reached the man himself, the young man himself. So I think I wanted to give Wayne a mention for that perception, and very timely, like the way he played football.
I'm sticking with my pivot midfielder for the old player, and I'm going with Andrea Pirlo. And the reason I'm going with him is that the standard pivot midfielders back in the early 90s, were your Didier Deschamps and Makelele, who won it, gave it, water carriers, as Eric Cantona so respectfully said. And Carlo Ancelotti, it was, no less, as manager of Milan, who took Pirlo, who was a top number 10. When I say a top number 10, I can remember a game between Italy under 21s and England under 21s where he destroyed England as a number 10 with his creativity, with his work in the attacking third of the field. But Ancelotti wanted someone to run the game at Milan, and he took him and he put him in front of the back line and told him to run the game. And you think, he can't defend, but he can run the game. And of course he went on and he won Champions Leagues and he won the World Cup, and was just the most wonderful player. And he said, one of his quotes was, this isn't verbatim, but was basically, the most important part of your body is the head. The feet are merely the tools. And just a wonderful, wonderful way of playing. And a way of controlling the game, and that is what you need to be now. And you look at Toni Kroos, who we've talked a lot about on this podcast, and Toni Kroos, when he came through at Bayern Munich, was a number 10, and it was a problem because he was obviously a good player, but they had Ribéry on the left wing, Robin on the right wing, and Müller, who was a couple of years or a year or two older than him, at number 10. And broken through first, so he couldn't get into the team there, and they were rotating it around, and Müller would often play on the right and Ribéry get a rest, or play on the left and Robin get a rest. And when they got to the Champions League final in 2012 and had a lot of defensive midfielders and central defenders suspended, they made Kroos play defensive midfield, and everyone said he couldn't do it. They were right. Chelsea won on penalties, albeit. But the point being, it was anathema to him at that stage. Now, they get rid of Casemiro, Ancelotti again, and bring Kroos back to play that role. And he's been one of the best players in the world for the last couple of years playing that role.
Well, one reason he has been is because he played alongside Luka Modric, who I was thinking of while you were talking about Pirlo. And I've mentioned this before. Tim Sherwood said he's the best defensive midfield player he's ever worked with. That was at Tottenham a long time ago. but it still applies, and it's the same principle. Oh, well, why would you put him there? Well, actually, he'll nick the ball, and then we'll play.
Yeah.
It won't have to give it to somebody else to play. So, no, it's interesting, and the more footballers you get into the team, and actually the ones who aren't footballers, the old line about can you play or can you not, that's gone now. It's really can you run or can you not at the top level. They can all play, and it's to see the technicians doing the hard yards as well, and you're absolutely spot on with those examples.
But just interesting again that it was Ancelotti with something innovative.
And what was he?
People don't think of him in that way.
But what was he as a player?
Oh, defensive midfield.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, who's your player this week?
Well, it's an easy one, really. I think Diogo Costa, the Portuguese goalkeeper, who actually got headlines bigger than Ronaldo when they got through against really gallant opposition in Slovenia. The save he made in the extra time from Benjamin Šeško, who hasn't quite had the opportunity in a team that's always been fighting for possession to show what a good player he is. But when he got clear that was his moment for the tournament. But Diogo Costa, Diogo Costa, it was a wonderful save. It wasn't just that the player hit the ball against him. And then, of course, the penalties where he was 3 for 3 and they were none for 3. And
they were all good saves.
All very good saves. And why want to praise him for it is he's 24, plays for Porto. He's been Portugal's goalkeeper for a little while, and he had a pretty ordinary World Cup. In the first game, I think it was against Ghana, he made a mistake. He just got away with one of those that was shown over and over again, lucky man. And then when they got knocked out, against Morocco, he didn't do very well on the goal that knocked them out. So he came back, and this tournament was coming up, and he was obviously asked questions about that, still holding the jersey. And he said, I've got to pay back my team for what happened in Qatar. Well, he's just done that. He's really done that. And we talk about getting moves in tournaments, and sometimes it's not the best thing. It might well work out for Enzo Fernandez at Chelsea, but he got the move on a great World Cup. And Alexis McAllister as well. On basically 5 weeks of football, 6-7 games. I don't think they didn't play all the games. Well, Diogo Costa is up for sale. Porto need to get some revenue in, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes. He'll be somebody else's player by the start of next season, I'm sure. But well played to him. And I feel sorry for Jan Oblak, because probably of all the saves that Costa made, that Oblak's save from Ronaldo's penalty was actually technically the best. It was an extraordinary reach, and of course mentally he'd sort of won that battle that he knew where side it was going. So it was that was a night for goalkeepers, and I think we'll have Magno is very good. We'll have a great debate at the end of the tournament. Who's going to be our goalkeeper of the tournament? There are a lot of candidates.
My player I'm going back to is Rodri. I cannot believe how good he is. When you go to games and watch him, he literally just sits there and runs the game. And all right, it's easy to run a game when you got De Bruyne and Silva and Foden ahead of you, but he runs the games. He's an extraordinary player, but he's doing it for Spain. He's doing it for Spain as well. And he's everything. He's two-footed. His first touch is divine. He is just such an intelligent footballer. And that's how possession football should be. Get it, give it. Get it, give it.
Did he play? He had to play centre-back in the World Cup, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, because Sergio Busquets was still at...
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why they committed suicide, death by 1,000 passes for themselves, because it didn't hurt the opposition at all. Had he been there, no disrespect to Busquets, who had a phenomenal career, but had he been there might have been just a little bit more purpose to the passing.
Yeah. I cannot believe what a good player he's become, but he really is up there with with the very best in the world. Okay, that is through the best. We're at the end, but we still have stoppage time.
Stoppage time.
And in stoppage time, we're going to plunge into Premier League mid-table. About 12 miles down the road from here, Sellers Park, Crystal Palace.
Right. I lived in South London for quite a few years. I lived in Dulwich and then Streatham, or Streatham then Dulwich. And I always felt South London got underappreciated, especially by the taxi drivers, for whom it was no point trying to get north of the river, get back. That's a bit of a stereotype, but it did happen to me a few times. Yeah, Crystal Palace, 4 players in the England squad. Mark Gahey's been an outstanding success, and not being available for the quarter-final is a worry for England, because he's filled the gap but created a status in his play that now it's a big gap filled when he's not playing. And the involvement of Eberechi Eze coming on and showing off his skills, another player who's developed so much at Palace. But they signed Adam Wharton in January, and he's in the England squad. He's played 15 Premier League games, started 15 Premier League games, and he's stepped up. And of course, Dean Henderson, who's been around a bit, is the Crystal Palace goalkeeper, is in the squad as well. But it was a few days ago now, but it just caught my eye that Daniel Munoz and Jefferson Lerma had scored for Colombia in the Copa America, both Crystal Palace players, and that they ended the season on a real high. I think they're doing some good business in the transfer market as well, and not involving the kind of deals that we've been talking about earlier in the competition. So the competition is not a competition, it's a podcast. But earlier in the podcast, and they don't seem to be in that position. They seem to be able to strengthen without having to worry about points deductions. So I'm just very pleased that somebody in an unfashionable part of London, at least according to the taxi drivers. There are a lot of good places in South London, by the way, and I can take you to some of them, but you don't cross the river very often yourself, do you? So,
well, we're south of the river here.
Oh, we are? Yeah, but it's not really count as South London. This is Surrey. I coached at Kingstone, and we were in the Surrey Senior Cup. We were in the London Senior Cup as well. Yes,
I would just say that when I go to Crystal Palace, I've got my calf for pre-match, which is very good. But I've got nowhere for afterwards, and if I want a meal afterwards, it's back to Clapham Junction, up to Pizza Metro.
Just pop into Sainsbury's, it's right by the ground. Other supermarkets are in the area, of course, as well. But that is on site, so there's always a snack or two to be gained there after a game.
I've been at a game at Crystal Palace where I swear there were more people in Sainsbury's than there were in the ground.
That's a long time ago.
It was.
People will be flocking to watch this team. But I just thought they deserve a mention. There are new players coming in, I think, with great promise, and Oliver Glasner has taken to it instantly, and given his record in the past, particularly at Frankfurt, where he won a European trophy, he looks like the right man. But I have to say, in defence of two good friends of mine, Roy Hodgson and Ray Lewington, that Wharton came in, Munoz came in before the change in management, and that was a change in management caused by health issues, not because the team weren't going places. But it does look as though it's falling into place. You can never tell. Between now is no one wants to be evaluated at all by anybody, let alone us at this stage, because it's a long way to go. They're all coming back for pre-season now, aren't they? The ones that aren't involved in international tournaments. So the hard work starts, but I can't wait to see how Palace develop. Michael Elise is obviously the negative. I don't know whether he's actually gone yet, but it seems that he's the player who does want to go. But for the rest, if they can keep everything together, good stoppage time talk, Neil.
Yeah, Crystal Palace. I want them to stay up because they're just down the road.
Yes, I'm forgetting we're still south of the river here, which is great.
Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Thank you for accepting South of the River snobs. From Martin and me.
See you next time.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We do a podcast a week. If you don't like something, have a word. If you do like something, have a word. And if you haven't got a word, you're weird.